So Martin Popoff, welcome back. The Goldmine
Yes,
Podcast.
thanks, man. Very
You got
cool.
a new
I
top
enjoyed our
20
last
and
chat, so this will be good too. So,
you did an alternate history of power pop in 20 albums. And it
exactly.
was a good one. Because these bands kind of they dip their foot into the water of power pop. Because we've had discussions what is power pop, and we both like power pop, but we're not exactly huge power pop fans like some of the other writers for Goldmine. But you didn't want to put any of the traditional power pop bands on this list, obviously because it's an alternate list, which is kind of like Badfinger and Raspberries. I was telling you that you said you said that Badfinger and Raspberries were dead to you, and I you meant that sort of era of power pop, but some of the power pop scribes were like, "Why did Martin say that?" But I knew what you meant, that it was a certain era, and it could sound dated. That era of 70s syrupy power pop could sound dated. I only like maybe like one Raspberry song. I love Badfinger, but I don't know if that kind of band could come out today and be successful. I'm not sure. It a lot of them did sound sort of 70s. But we're not going to get into that. We'll talk about the alternate list here. What would you describe as alternate? Was I describing it right? As bands that
Yeah,
kind of
so
dip their
so I
toe?
I know I know among the staff we've got some definite power pop experts, and those are the guys who should be writing about power pop. But this is like an outlaw version of that, or like a long haired 5 member band version of it, or if you're a hard rock fan, you might be into these a little bit. So
Right.
the actual power pop to me, I find in a general sense lacks the power, and it's more like AM radio slash pop.
Mm.
It's a little it is sophisticated. It's a little sophisticated or sufficiently sophisticated, but it's really not slash power. It's slash AM pop.
Right.
That's always kind of annoyed me about it. And then you've got, I think you've got another sort of rivulet or stream of it, which is something I like to call polite glam. You've got the UK glam stuff from 71 to 74, but after that, everybody starts dressing up a little bit and putting on their leisure suits, and you've got your Sailor and your early City Boy and Hello and all those bands kind of in that realm, in the UK, which I also sometimes call like the UK's version of yacht rock almost, right?
Right.
So that 75 to 77 period is kind of in there as well. So that kind of stuff is not what I wanted to get at. I wanted this to be an alternate list, and like I say, this is almost like it's a little more powerful, a little more rocky, a little more long hair, a little more 5 members of the band, probably 2 guitars and a keyboardist in a lot of cases. And it also really crosses over, and is essentially a list of what we would call pomp rock.
Hmm.
Pomp rock is a little known or little discussed thing. So in essence, this alternate list of 20 albums is a pomp rock list. It's not strictly power pop, but I guess what I'm doing is making the argument that pomp rock is my version of alternate power pop.
Okay. But did I describe it right about when you said that certain bands are dead to you? Did I describe it right about why you said that?
Yeah, I mean, you bring up era, and that's an interesting thing to bring up, because what you're going to find with this list is so much of it centers around the year 1979, right?
Right.
79, 78. And it sounds like a lot of people's version of the power pop era, of the traditional power pop era, is earlier than that, although 1979 always comes out as an important year. But then, there's also kind of like, you can make the argument of there being some power popish albums in 80 and 81 as well.
Hmm.
But I think when you get to 79, now you're into your the Cars and the Knack
Right.
sort of era, right? The Romantics, maybe even Tom Petty in some respects, right? But yeah, it's you're right. I mean, I think those big power pop albums, Big Star, Raspberries, Badfinger, and all that is more of like a 72 to 75 story.
Correct. But I think you start off the list um, describing the power chord and really bringing it into a poppy song, which Mick Jones does, a foreigner. So Double Vision, the album Double Vision that came out in 1978, is a good example of what you're talking about here. And your picks get even better. But Foreigner did a good job. Of course, in the 80s, they got more ballady, but they did a good job in the late 70s of infusing uh, poppy choruses or catchy choruses in some sort of like meaty hard rock riffs, right? So I think Double Vision is a good example here.
Yeah, and this is the one I got the most complaints about, and I knew I would
Really?
because Foreigner never gets included in the power pop story, um, because they're too kind of arrogant and long haired and belligerent and too linked to Bad Company, which is not considered a power pop sort of realm, right? Bad Company free. So they come along in that, and frankly, me as a kid, and I think this is still feeling true when you get complaints about it. We were always jealous of Foreigner selling all these records when all our favorite bands weren't selling squat, right?
Mhm.
They were such a huge, massive band you couldn't get away from them. So you really got sick of them and resentful of this stuff because we were young, angry metalheads, right? And it just wasn't quite heavy enough for us. But absolutely, I think a lot of what you get across those albums you could put into that power pop thing. And again, it's pomp rock as well, right? So in that middle ground, you've got the pomp rock, you've got the stuff that's a little heavier and a little more Bad Company, and then you've got the true ballads, right? But that pomp rock zone, I think, is where you've got something that you could call power pop.
And also, I think, did you have Columbia House Record Club up there in Canada?
Yeah, and I started out getting stuff that way. At
Okay.
the we didn't last very long with it because we realized how the whole scam works, right, kind of thing. But I remember I was getting Three Dog Night and CCR albums and Steppenwolf. Those were my first three or so rock bands, and it was because of that
Well,
situation.
this album was kind of constantly forced on you in that club, and Foreigner itself. So I could see how you're saying that, certain people felt like, Foreigner was kind of forced on you when there are other bands that they could have put in there, right?
Yeah.
Um, but no, I certainly see that. Okay, the next band I've never um, heard, Trillion, and that's a Canadian band, correct? I gotta
No,
go.
no, I don't think so. I think they're from the States.
They are. Let me say, I've never checked out Trillion. Now, so you turned me on to a band. Maybe you could describe their feel.
Yeah. So as I
Level.
say in this entry, it's almost like a placeholder band for the likes of Roadmaster, Touch, 707, and in Canada, Trooper, Prism, Streetheart, Loverboy, right?
Got
So
you.
so this whole idea, we were just having this discussion yesterday. I truly believe, and I did a podcast episode of History in Five Songs on this, that Canada invented hair metal. And so, because the Canada has this glut of pre-hair metal bands, Trooper, Prism, Streetheart, Loverboy, Headpins, Toronto, Coney Hatch, Santers, Triumph, April Wine, all these bands putting out all this stuff from sort of 79 to 82 just before hair metal starts. And it's literally the blueprint for hair metal in a proto sense, right? But again, it is also pomp rock, right? But in the States, you had these one or two record bands, and later we're going to talk about New England. They fit in this as well. So this is literally, hard rock with a lot of pop and some prog accoutrements as well. Styx is kind of like a big inspiration or a grandfather band to this pomp rock idea, right?
Mhm.
And Trillion are just one of these minor bands that a fair few people know about in the underground. So the one album in '78 and then Clear Approach in 1980. But yeah, I mean, none of these are all that great. I mean, this songwriting is never considered too incredible on these things. But when you hear the complicated arrangements and the hooks and stuff, you can tell there's some Styx and there's some Queen going into what they're doing. But essentially, it's pretty traditional, trying to make radio hits rock and roll.
Interesting. I'll check them out. Not sure I'll like them, but Next up, 18, you got Angel, the album Sinful in 79. Now, I always liked Angel more live, because of their production into a live show. And I like when they began because they were a little more proggy, and then they got kind of cutesy or syrupy. I don't know what you would call it, but I guess they could definitely be on this list. I mean, were you a fan when they came out?
Yeah, I was a fan right from the beginning. I've written the only book on Angel. What did I call it?
Really?
Fortune or On the Rocks, The Fortune. What is it called here? Anyways, I've got a big, thick, normal, wordy book on Angel that I wrote. Um, and I loved Angel and Hell of a Band. To me, that proggy, deep purple part of the band is my favorite. And then there's a traditional album. And then the last two, the Felix Robinson years, are the more power pop ones
Hmm.
or pop rock ones. So I've got Sinful in here from 79 because, like I say, 79 is the spiritual year of punk rock. But at this point, Punky Meadows, he's kind of proven himself on the very nice, two reunion albums they've done. He's proven himself that he really loved this pop aspect more than the heavy metal aspect, and he said that in my book repeatedly. He really kind of disowns those first two albums, and in the hard rock world, those are masterpieces.
I know, it's too bad.
Power and the Fortune and all those songs. Wow. I mean, and they're beautifully, beautifully recorded, big John Lord keyboards on there kind of thing. Right. But yeah, at this point, the last two albums they ever did before Reunion are these pretty light and poppy albums.
Did you ever get to see them live?
No, not even recently or in the old
I
days.
wanted to, but I was too young. But seeing clips, and they had a live album that they were
Yeah.
supposed to be really great. And of course, Gene Simmons is said to have discovered them. Um, whether that's true or not, I don't know, but that's how it goes down in history.
Well,
Um,
they were on Casablanca, right? They were all
yep,
dressed in
yep,
white, so the antithesis to Kiss. And there's, rumors that
that's true.
that they didn't support Kiss because Gene thought they were too good of a band to support them, kind of thing. So there's
They're
there's
kind
that
of
there's that kind of talk that I hear too.
that whole dressing all in white, and being called Angel and being sort of like heavenly was like a precursor to Striper almost. Well, I don't
Yeah,
know if they were Christian, but uh, it's thankfully they didn't wear yellow and black. Um,
exactly.
Anyway, next up, Billy Squire, The Tale of the Tape, 1980. Now, I'm curious why you didn't pick Don't Say No. Maybe because of you wanted to stay in around 1980, 19 late
Yeah.
70s. But those other two albums, Don't Say No and Emotions in Motion, were, God, I loved those albums as a kid. I was never a big fan of his Piper band, which I
Yeah.
guess you could have included in here, maybe. I don't know. But they might be too early for that release. But maybe you could describe why you picked The Tale of the Tape. Was it because what I said, the time it came out?
Exactly. And your whole kind of analysis of those catalogs is perfect too. So this is like a transitional album. It's before you get kind of that signature Mac sound. Billy actually gets to be kind of a noisy, wild, chaotic Who like act
Mm,
in his big years. I mean, those albums are pretty ragged for being, for being as big as they got. They're quite noisy, right? So I
mhm,
think he actually moves away from power pop a little, and
mhm.
this is sort of that sweet spot where you could say it's power pop. And I mentioned the song "Who's Your Boyfriend," and I got a lot of comments on that saying exactly that's a perfect power pop song. So yeah, interesting artist. I think he's really cool, and a lot of why he was successful is the production of Reinhold Mack. Famously coming up through ELO. I just did up a whole podcast episode on Mack. Coming up through ELO and Queen, but also the big sound he gives Billy Squire.
Yeah, he became kind of he disappeared kind of. It's kind of weird. Um, I wouldn't call it retirement, but you never really hear about him anymore, right?
Yes, I read up on him recently. He completely quit the business and did other things. He just got out of the business, right?
We
He
we
had that
did it
famous thing happen with
right.
that video, right? And
Oh yeah.
supposedly drummed out of the business, right? Not really, because he made a lot of music after that, and really fine artist, like good stuff, right? I interviewed him once, but yeah, his funny story was he goes, "Yeah, Martin, I was hanging out in the bar in Boston, and Rick Ocasek came up to me and said, 'Yeah, I got this new project, Billy. I'm calling it the Cars,' and Billy goes to him, 'Oh yeah, nice name. Yeah, that'll go far.'" I thought that was really funny. So, but yeah, really good artist, really cool guy, and yeah, just one of these guys who famously decided, I don't know, I don't want to be a rock and roller anymore.
I mean, I do remember being in high school and when, he was prancing around in his music videos, that was a big deal.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
these guys who were into metal and hard rock disowned him. They were like, "Oh man, what is wrong with them?" Mick Jagger does it all the time, but I think Mick Jagger looks natural when he dances around, right?
yeah,
Billy
yeah,
didn't seem natural when he was doing it. It was almost like they told him prance around, prance
yeah,
around the video. So yeah, I remember it was a big thing in high school. Screw Billy, man. I'm not listening to him again. But we were teenagers, so what can I say? Next up, XTC Black Sea that came out in 1980, and I've always had a soft spot for XTC, especially when they put out that a song, Dear God. I think that's a fabulous song. But that's what they're capable of. They're capable of greatness. And Andy Partridge is too. And why did you pick this one in particular?
Well, I adore XTC. I love them to death. Now, but putting them in here is a little problematic. When I did a little research here, XTC actually does come up as a band that
Mhm.
people want to talk about as part of the power pop situation. And the fact of the matter is, just they aren't wired for power pop. I mean, obviously, this is way after they're a post punk band. This is way after the Raspberries and Badfinger and all that. But they were fairly prolific for that time they existed, and there was a lot of pop. And I do mention the Skylarking album here, but I wanted to pick something fairly early, but you couldn't really go with White Music or Go To or Drums and Wires, because those are too quirky and herky jerky, and this is where you start getting a little more of the pop, and then there's quite a bit of pop going forward, but they have a very heavy Beatlesque bent to them, and they're just like wise music swamis. They're massive music people making these things. So it's very highly crafted music, but a lot of it is quite experimental. I almost feel like XTC is just too smart to be called power pop. I almost feel I'm putting them down, putting them in this list, because they're probably the biggest brainiacs on this list.
However, Andy Partridge is a huge Monkees fan and very influenced by that sort of poppy feel, right? Even though the Monkees,
Mhm.
you can argue, didn't write a lot of their hits, right? But the Monkees were a good, I would say you could put the Monkees in the sort of power pop, category.
Well, yeah, people even say Beach Boys and of course Beatles. And as soon as you open it up to all that, now we're just talking about
Now the
songwriting and
floodgates.
pop.
But now
Oh,
you got
the
Todd
abstract.
Rundgren here. He was a power
Yeah.
pop icon.
Yeah.
He produced Skylarking, so
Yeah.
I think this is a legit pick. Next, I really like this next pick, Stars. It goes back to 1976. Um, Stars was always one of those bands that I remember everyone wanted them to be huge, but when I was in high school, but they kind of they didn't make the the cut. They never became a Led Zeppelin or anything like that. But this is a good pick.
Yeah, I've written the story of all of their four albums as an ebook that you can get at Zunior.com. I don't think I'll ever be able to do a full book on them, but it's probably, I don't know, 25,000 words. It's a good chunk of change on Stars. And yeah, they only had this debut self-titled. They had Violation in 77. They had Attention Shoppers, the famously very poppy album, in 78, and then Coliseum Rock in 78, and that was the end, right?
Mhm.
But yeah, there's some beautiful pop hooks across these albums. Michael Lee Smith, famously the brother of Rex Smith, from the Rex band, who are just a little too heavy to be considered power pop, I would say. But yeah, Stars, I mentioned Cherry Baby from Violation here, but I think the first album maybe has the most. And then, and again, Attention Shoppers is the poppiest, but it's not very powerful. So, and we hated it when it came out. It was shocking to us, that album. Weird X-ray specs and good ale we seek. It's like, oh man, this is going to be awesome. And then every other song was not heavy on it, right?
That
So that
happened
was
to
too
a
bad.
lot of hard rock bands in the 80s,
Yeah,
especially.
exactly.
Um,
Well, so that brings up a good point, because this whole 78 to 79 nexus,
yeah.
where our heavy bands start getting lighter, it is because of poppy new wave sort of thing taking over.
Hmm.
Heavy metal was sort of briefly not in vogue at all at that time.
Right. It was a weird transition.
Yep.
Okay, New England, Explorer Suite, 1980. Maybe you can say, maybe this falls into the polite glam. I don't know. What do you
Well,
think?
they come up later as well, so I'll try to be brief about it and just encapsulate. But they were, famously the debut was produced by Paul Stanley. This is the second album, and they're more like they fit what I said earlier about having an overt Queen influence and,
Yeah.
and an overt thespian theatrical feel to what they do. Right? Very pomp. I used to call a form of power metal that had a lot of keyboards. I used to call it frilly sleeves power metal, right? So this is, you can almost see New England dressed up in those Edwardian costumes that you see like on the cover of I think it's the first Deep Purple album, right? Or the way Cream used to dress, right? But so it's very regal and ornate, but it's still pop. And it's up tempo and it's short songs, but still you get that prog aspect, that Styx aspect. But yeah, it's very actorly and painterly, New England. But it's yeah, so it's poppy hard rock is essentially what it is.
Maybe bands could bring back that frilly sleeves look. What do you
Yeah, yeah.
think?
Exactly. Yeah.
It would be original, right?
Yeah. The crushed velvet suits and yeah.
Oh God. The Babies is next at number 13, On the Edge, 1980. You call it you say you prefer the Jonathan Cain era Babies, is that correct?
Definitely. Everybody in our age group says, "Oh yeah, early babies is so cool, man." I play that stuff and I just can't get into it. I think the songwriting's terrible. I think it's better later on, and I love this album. And John Waite comes in later on the list. I think he gets even better. As I think John as a solo artist in the beginning is even cooler than the babies. But I love this album, and I think this is where you get the best pop hooks.
I like John Waite, his solo stuff more probably than the Babies, but
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
That's people are probably the Babies never really made it big, really, right? I mean, if you went up to your regular record store day crowd and said, do you like the Babies? Do you think a lot of them would, know who the
Well,
Babies are?
Pat, I think a lot of the story there, or some of the story, is a little bit of an untold story that, apparently John Waite was a real jerky guy to a lot of bands. I mean, I remember a story he told me. Um, he admitted this. He told me about them supporting Triumph, and
Yeah.
he was in a surly mood, and he was kicking out all those bare light bulbs on the Triumph stage.
Wow.
Yeah, and like apparently he was a pretty jerky dude, right?
Wow.
And you hear that about what's his name? Is it Feiger? What's his first name? The leader of the Knack, Don Feiger.
Oh, right, right.
Anyways, people
Come
said
to the
he was a
back.
jerky dude, right? So,
Really?
and we know that about Kevin Dubrow as well. So sometimes you wonder. It's a little bit like heroin, right? You see bands that don't do well in the industry, and the albums get further and farther apart, and you go, might be heroin causing that, right? But you get that with the jerkiness of bands too, where you go, maybe this band didn't make it because they didn't play the game well enough.
Yeah, they
And
didn't
they
get along with
rubbed
others.
the radio people and the people at the label the wrong way or whatever. So I sometimes wonder that about John Waite and the Babies, that
That's a
that maybe
good point
he ticked too many industry people off
because
along the
if
way.
the bands that support you, if you're not, if you don't treat them right, they might become more popular than you in a few years, right? And
Yeah,
then be like, I remember you. You didn't,
yeah,
you weren't very kind to us. So
yeah,
yeah, I could see that. And, fans don't like that either when they find out that their idols are jerks.
yeah.
So yeah, I can see that. But he did. John became this, poster boy, for the young girls in my high school, right? They loved Missing You.
Yeah.
Um, he was good at doing that stuff. Anyway, yeah, you're right. He changed because he's a pretty nice guy now.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, he's been through a lot, right? And he
right,
he basically wears his heart on his sleeve. He's a very honest guy. He's been through a lot, and he'll tell you all his faults and foibles and all that
right.
stuff, right? So yeah, it's pretty inspiring talking to that guy. Um, but yeah, I just feel along the way that happened. I know that happened with the knack. I just remember hearing those stories about him ticking off
Oh
a
yeah,
lot of people in the
I've heard
industry,
them
right?
too. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Now that I think about it, and a lot of people criticize their lyrics. Of course, it's easy to
right.
them. Um, but here you go again with the next one, number 12, bringing in Rick Derringer again.
Yeah,
Somehow Rick always sneaks into your list. I think
yeah.
you're a secret big Rick Derringer fan.
Yeah, of a few of the albums, definitely. I do
Actually,
love his voice. And this album, again, it's that perfect spiritual year for pump rock slash outlaw power pop, 1979. And what I've always loved about this album, which I just find hilarious,
not the
is that
cover.
there's two raging
Right.
heavy metal songs on it. They're both written by Rick Nielsen from Cheap Trick, of all people. I
Right.
think
Oh,
that's
good
funny
point.
about
Yeah.
this record. Yeah.
Yeah. Rick, God, this is an awful album cover. I think you did a top 20 of Rick Derringer songs for Goldmine, if I'm not mistaken. I'll have to go
That's
back
right.
and
Yeah.
look if this
Yeah.
this album is how it's mentioned there. But again, here we go. Co-produced by Todd Rundgren.
Yeah.
Next is another band that is kind of was really live, especially was talked about a lot in those early '80s days. The Tubes.
Yeah.
Um, the completion backward principle you got here. Um, you call this is interesting. A Zappa-esque cabaret band.
Yeah. Yeah, they went through a lot of changes over the years, but by this point, this is a weird one that people don't bring up when they think about power pop. I remember this song being all over radio all the time.
Oh
I
yeah,
mean, this
talk to you
album.
later.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
much of this album actually, but I find it to be very poppy. They did a good job of being poppy. Fee Waybill could do that perfectly well. So yeah, I figured put them in. It's a good outlaw choice.
Did you see them live? I never got to see them live.
I've only seen them live once. It was a fond memory for me. About 15 years ago, and it was like an old Tubes show, and I got to hang backstage and interview them and stuff. They were super nice guys. Signed all my stuff for me, and yeah, it was really cool. And I love all eras of that band. Least so the later kind of funky era, but I like this middle era, and I like the earlier more Zappa-esque cabaret band era.
Okay, next we got our buddy John Wade again, number
Yep.
10, Ignition, 1982.
Yep.
How do you describe this? You call it kind of like a Midwestern feel, right? Um,
Yeah, so at this point, he's striking me, as I say in this entry, in that John Cougar Mellencamp, Sammy Hagar,
okay,
Rick Springfield Night Ranger feel.
all right.
That Midwest rock thing. He really sounds like a high octane version of Bruce Springsteen on this album. I think this album's a masterpiece, start to finish. I just love it. I like it more than any Babies album, and yeah, I've always liked that heartland Americana kind of big epic sort of chords that is something it also comes from that whole Van Morrison through Bruce Springsteen through Graham Parker kind of feel. But yeah, I think it feels like if Bryan Adams was a better songwriter and had more interesting and more hard rock and more passionate performances from his band, or John Mellencamp, it would be John Wade.
Hmm. You know who I think captured that Midwestern feel? They were from Pennsylvania. Joe Grosecki and the Iron City Rockers. Have you heard them?
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they were good at that heavier kind of Bruce Springsteen feel.
Hmm.
Um, they would not be included in this list, but I think they fell into where you're edging towards with that Midwestern feel. Anyway,
Hmm.
New England pops up again at number 9. And you talk about Paul Stanley producing. Um, again, you said I think you wanted to make a comment about this album, right? The self-titled.
Yeah, I think this is almost a perfect one, and this brings up a point. I got a lot of complaints for having, some bands have two entries in this list of 20 and stuff,
Right.
and as I explain to people when they say that, it's like when I make these lists,
Mm.
I basically think of albums and start popping them into a Word document above, below, above, below, above, below. And then what happens is, okay, I've got 20, I've got 25, I've got 30, and I have to make a cutoff point. And if I got something hanging out at number 3 and at number 10, I'm not going to knock off the number 10 just for variety's sake. You got to be honest about these things, right? So yeah, New England makes it twice. This has the massive outlaw power pop classic "Don't Ever Want to Lose You," which was a bit of a minor hit, but you just hear the sublime sort of, Hammond organ guitar meld going on in that, and just this creamy production values. And it's just such a Queen punk rocky thing. They're actually the quintessential punk rock band, I think, and I think this is the quintessential punk rock album.
Do you think Paul Stanley's a good producer?
I don't know. I don't know if he had much to do with this. It certainly, there's no Paul Stanley sound. We don't know because we don't have 10 albums to compare to each other, right? So I have no idea if he's a good producer or not. He's
Is it called?
certainly a massive musicologist. He knows what he's doing.
Oh yeah.
But is he a guy to get under the desk and move wires around and all that kind of stuff? No, I don't think he's that kind of producer.
Because you
So I
called
don't
it
know really what he had to do with it, other than it's kind of cool having his name on there.
right. Because you called it a creamy production.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyway, I love the next pick, 8, the Buzzcocks. The Buzzcocks were great at sort of mixing punk in this Beatlesque sort of way, right? Um,
Yeah, this is another very outlaw pick that you don't normally see them. Yeah, I mean, some people bring them up with power pop, but they were kind of like fast and frantic and tight and punky when it came to like the performance and the arrangements, but the songs themselves were very poppy, right?
yes.
And Pete Shelley's voice is poppy enough. It's not an abrasive punk voice, so it's a little yangy. But other than that, yeah, they wrote many beautiful little pop jewels across their catalog.
I mean, I think that's my favorite kind of punk. Not too poppy where it's pop punk, but have elements of pop where it's catchy enough, right? But yet
Yeah.
have that attitude, that sort of aggression.
Yeah, it's a great way of putting it. It's all guitar, bass, and drums. It's all fairly fast, simple, short songs, and really good erudite, lyrics as well. They were a smart band. Nice album cover designs, right? That simple kind of modernist look to them. Yeah, great band.
All right, you mentioned the Tubes again in your next pick, number 7, Remote Control in 79, and here we go again with Todd Rundgren producing.
Yeah, I just love this album, in particular from the Tubes, and I like the fact. See, when you get all these Todd Rundgren productions coming up, often they can sound fairly different, but one thing you kind of seem to get from them, and you get it out of like something like Cheap Trick, Next Position Please, you do get kind of, although you don't really get it on Remote Control, but you get the pop coming through, it breathes through, and sometimes you get a thinness, where you get a lot of treble and you get the vocals fairly high in the mix sometimes, I think, with Todd albums. But for some reason, him being there with his strong opinions and battling with these bands, it seems, you do get some semblance of Todd's power pop, past breathing through on these albums he produces.
I gotta say, you made it sound like the album would have been better without him involved in it. Yeah, you said something to the point where the songs could have been maybe heavier, and he was pushing it towards like a Billy Joel type of feel at the end here.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, bubbly is another thing I
Yeah,
use
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and I left Cheap Trick off this list because they are always included in the power pop story. But one of my favorite Cheap Trick albums is the one he produced, and it's later, and people don't think about it very much. Next Position Please. It's always the '70s stuff people talk about with Tom Werman, but I love that album, and that is truly a even more power poppy than the early stuff, the '70s stuff.
Okay, next 6 is Derringer again. If I weren't so romantic, I'd shoot you.
Yes.
1978.
Yeah,
Great
this is
title. Um,
yeah.
Simple but effective album cover. Um,
Yeah.
So here we go with Derringer. And Derringer always had this, listen, you were talking about Brainiac for XTC. He wasn't exactly, his lyrics weren't exactly Brainiac material, right? They were just like rock and roll party, have a good time. Don't you think? Always.
Yeah, yeah. And this album's Derringer in name only because the Derringer self-titled and
Right.
Sweet Evil are more of like Aerosmithy albums. And this one, massive lineup change. It's kind of like a trio album. But to me, this is much closer to Guitars and Women, and it's why it's on here. So we got two Derringer on here. I just love this album. I think it's very upbeat and fun and poppy. And again, his voice just lends itself almost like in a Todd Rundgren sort of way to this idea of outlaw power pop.
You do say it borders on comedic at times.
Yep. Yeah, you look at that list of songs, right? As I say, they're easy action, it ain't funny, rock and roll, monomania. There's a lot of kind of and like us, and even the covering Warren Zevon's "Lawyers, Guns, and Money," which is a smart
Right.
song, but it's a funny song as well.
Right. Okay, next, breaking the top five is the Boomtown Rats, The Fine Art of Surfacing in 1979. Um, the Boomtown Rats should be mentioned more. I just think in general, no?
Yeah. So what happened with them is the first album was like a very polished form of actual punk rock. It's fairly heavy, and that's why we liked it as kids when it came out in '78, produced by Mutt Lange, famously.
Mhm.
Um, but then right after that, they went total pop, Tonic for the Troops. And then so this album I've got in here is an absolute masterpiece. It's their third album, The Fine Art of Surfacing. Beautiful, beautiful pop album. Great, ambitious arrangements, just awesome chord sequences. But then after this, unfortunately, they went kind of like funky dance, jungly, kind of weird. I don't like Five Deep and Mondo Bongo or whatever it's called. To me, this is the absolute classic, and I quite like the first two as well. But yeah, this is just a great album. Beautiful, lush production values. Mutt Lange again. But yeah, someone's looking at you. Keep it up. When the Night Comes Down, I mentioned in there. So again, they're another band that comes from that Graham Parker, Elvis Costello, Stiff Records, Nick Lowe, Bruce Springsteen, Van
Exactly.
Morrison kind of thing, being Irish, right? So they've got a little bit of that going on in this band as well through the great presence of Bob Geldof.
I'll have to revisit the album because you do say it's sort of like the best of Elvis Costello and Joe Jackson, which at that time were both favorites of mine, that era,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
late 70s. They did such a wonderful job at driving rock that, also I would say, uh, fun and thinking man rock too. I mean, Elvis could get pretty his lyrics were fantastic.
Oh
And
yeah. Yeah.
next, the Hounds. Now, a lot of people probably don't know this band, Putting on the Dog, 1979. Maybe
Yeah.
you could
Yeah.
describe it a little.
Yeah, I love this album. Absolute masterpiece. They only made two albums. The first one was called Unleashed in '78. It's a little rougher, grittier. It's got real punk rock album cover, which throws you off because it's not like that at all. But it's kind of long haired, hard rock and roll, that album. But
Yep.
this one's got this really extreme, bright production, big snare drum sound, super highs on it. And it's very, very poppy. And as I say in here, Working on My Cool, I think is just a classic power pop sort of song. It reminds me, do I mention Boston in here? Maybe I don't, but
You,
it
you do.
reminds me of the
Boston. Yeah.
oh, okay. So the bright production sheen of Boston is kind of inherent in here as well. But
New
this
Wave
is
meets Boston, you described it as.
yeah, so this is Jeffrey Lesser produces this album, and it's right in that perfect year for this 1979. It's got this great cover of "Who Will Be the Next in Line" by the Kinks, which is they do it in a real hard rock version. So it's very Queen, it's very Boston. A lot of people don't know it. I think this album, just generally speaking, the sequencing of it, the songs that are on it, this could have been an absolute smash hit. It was on CBS, but yeah, they didn't make it. Chicago band, I believe, right? And yeah, really cool album. I wish more people knew about it.
If I were to walk in to a record store, go through the bins, and I saw this cover, I would automatically think Rat. Like I would get
Right.
this impression that this was a hair metal band. just
Yeah.
by the cover, scantily clad woman in a
Yeah.
bedroom,
Yeah.
the cover's trying to be witty, etc. With the
Yeah.
no, am I wrong there? This has like a very hair metal album cover.
Yeah, but I think just the general design aesthetic of it, you'd click on to that it was a 70s album, right?
Okay,
But it looks expensive too, right? It's a very classy scene as
true.
well. And it is on CBS, and you turn it over and it looks
Yeah.
like an expensive album. This could have been a huge hit. I don't know why they weren't a hit. But yeah, it's in a world where Boston can be so massive, this should have been bigger too.
Now Graham Parker gets a mention, and not for the third album, Squeezing Out Sparks. This is a good album. This is a really good album. But
Yeah, and another outlaw choice, right? I mean, this is a band that never, or an artist that never really gets talked about in the power pop story, but I think he does a beautiful job. To me, he's like a more interesting musically version of Elvis Costello. Elvis Costello, as you say, is one of the master lyricists of all time, and Graham Parker's good too. Um, but I just feel like it's a little more up tempo, a little more rocky, a little more hard rocking guitar in here, a little rougher. I just love the guy. He's an amazing, amazing songwriter. So, I've never been a massive Bruce Springsteen fan, but that ethic that you get from Bruce Springsteen and Van Morrison, I like to see it injected into some of these other artists that I love. I mean, UFO even has a little bit of that going, right? But yeah, Graham Parker, I think, is just a little more louder, rockier version of Elvis Costello, and that's what I love about him.
yeah, Elvis's lyrics had a sort of caring but caustic uh thing about them that I love so much. It was a
Yeah,
way of balancing that. And Graham never got he touched on that, but he never really hit it big in the States.
no,
It's that part is a shame because while a lot of us were listening to Elvis Costello and Joe Jackson back in the early '80s, we probably weren't listening to Graham Parker, or he just kind of like maybe a few songs, right? Uh,
yeah.
yeah, he should have been bigger in the States, but
Yeah. I love this one. I love Up Escalator. I love when it's
yeah,
not Graham Parker in the room or later with things like what is it called? Steady Nerves, The Real Macaw. I
right.
love Another Gray Area. I don't like the ones that generally. I think the one or two. I think there's two albums before Squeezing Out Sparks that are just a little too Southside Johnny pub rock for me. I like when he's getting a little more modern here with Squeezing Out Sparks. I think most people consider Squeezing Out Sparks the masterpiece of the catalog, but a lot of people like Howlin' Wind. What is the other one called? Heat Treatment. Earlier, I'm not into that stuff as much because they're a little too Bruce Springsteen for me.
Pub rock. Now that would be an interesting top 20. I don't know if anyone would give a shit, but in America, but pub rock would be an interesting top 20 album picks. Um,
Yeah, that's a really enigmatic, weird
oh yeah.
kind of music. And we did a whole Contrarians episode where we grappled with the definition of pub rock. It's a hard one. It's a challenge, that
Oh, it's
one.
going
And
down a
I
big
really don't like that music either.
it's
Kind of.
going down a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Okay, next City Boy, and here we have Mutt Lang again. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's interesting that Mutt shows up again.
the day the
Um,
earth caught
did you
fire.
like this album? Did you like
I
this
didn't
band?
have this in my collection.
Mm-hmm.
So no, I'm not very familiar with it. I was more talking about Def Leppard. I was a big Def Leppard fan. So no, I did not have this.
Yeah, so
Oh,
this
that you
band
called
is
it UK's version of yacht rock, right? Polite glam. Uh,
exactly. So they fit into that. So this is Mutt Lang comes from South Africa, and this is almost like his working materials band or his experiment band to become the big Mutt Lang he would become. So these are very produced albums with a lot of ideas. But now we're into, I don't know if this is their third album, fourth album, fifth album. It's we're moving into where there's it's a heavy album, fairly heavy. I love it. It's an absolute masterpiece, but it is pomp rock. It is actorly thespian. This band has these very sort of flouncy, falsetto, Queen-like vocals at times.
Hmm.
It is very dramatic, but there is some good heavy rock on this album and some good conceptual stuff. Ambition is this long suite on here. So to me, this is the band's masterpiece. I like their other material as well. The other band that they remind me of a little bit is Supertramp and also 10cc. But like I say, the earlier albums, what do we got? Young Man Goes West, Book Early. I think there's one other one. So maybe this is their fourth album. But and later on, I don't think they're that good. The later albums, I think there's one called Heads Will Roll or Heads Are Rolling. But to me, this is an absolute masterpiece. And again, I love that it's right there in our 1979. So yeah, look at this. Our last 4, 5, our top 5 are all 1979.
Well, okay, so City Boy is going to be on this album in particular is going to be on my list next time I do a record store crawl. See if I can find it in the used section. I've never seen it in the used section, but it's
I'm
probably worth
surprised because somehow I ended up in my trashy record,
Oh man,
chaotic, accumulating
man, I have to send me a
years.
copy.
I ended up with I've got like 4 copies of The Day the Earth Caught Fire, and they're probably all cost me $1 a piece. It's just really bizarre. I don't know how I ended up with so many copies of it, but
Well, I'd
yeah,
like to keep a lookout
it's
for it.
easy to find and it's cheap. Don't worry about it.
Maybe I'm just overlooking it. I'm
Yeah.
not paying attention. Like I said, during this time with Mutt Lang stuff, I was, Def Leppard was big with me at this time. Mutt Lang would go on to kind of shape them, right? But
Yeah.
this you certainly couldn't call Def Leppard polite nor glam at that time. So, but I have to check this out because you do mention Sparks too. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, maybe maybe record stores should have a section pump rock,
Exactly. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And just fill it with stuff from this list because this is basically all of it.
Exactly.
There weren't that many albums, and there are all the bands that you can sort of put in that do you put them
I
in or not? But
I
the neat
love when
thing about
record
pop
stores.
rock is most of them only had 2 or 3 albums, so you could put them in, and it wouldn't take up that much space. But like I say, you move into your, you could move and expand it and include Queen and Styx and Supertramp in pop rock as well. But there is this tight definition that lands around this year, 1979.
Yeah, I think that I love when record stores do that, by the way. They go beyond the regular section of just rock, right? And they put like a
Mhm.
pop rock or prog rock or
Yeah,
psychedelic rock. They have a little section for it. I love when
or
they
or
do
or
that.
frilly sleeves metal.
Yeah, that's going to come back, my prediction.
Yeah.
Okay, now Max Webster, of course, this is talked about a lot, right? Amongst I would guess record collectors mostly, A Million Vacations. Maybe you could describe why you picked it for number one.
Yeah, so this is one that you won't see on pop
Hmm.
power pop. Yeah. I forgot the term already. Power pop list. You
Alternate
don't
power.
see it for that because this is a very weird, enigmatic band. It's an
Yeah.
amazing band. People love it. They're like the Baby Rush. They're from Canada. They only had what is it, 5
Baby
albums.
Rush. That's interesting.
Well, yeah, they were on Anthem. They were managed by the same people. They're from Toronto. Um, they went on tour. Rush took them on tour all the time, and they even are loosely in this idea of progressive metal. They're very hard to describe. They're almost too varied to call them even outlaw power pop, or you could call them pop rock, I suppose. But they've got hard rock elements, prog elements, comedic elements,
Hmm.
ballads, a lot of keyboards, a lot of different keyboard sounds, beautiful, beautiful production values. Terry Brown, Rush's producer, also
Mhm.
produces them. And even Hugh Syme, Rush's album cover designer, designs their album covers. Many, many ties to Rush. They even have the song on their very last album, Universal Juveniles. There's a song in there called Battle Scar, which is all of Rush and all of Max Webster playing at the same time on it. So, and that's a big, heavy, slow song. It's really cool. So yeah, they are definitely the Baby Rush. And Yeah, super hard to describe. I often describe them as a cross between Blue Oyster Cult and Cheap Trick. Um, and yeah, this is their most keyboardy, poppiest album. It was the biggest album. Every one of their albums is like gold and platinum in Canada. They had, they were a fairly big band in Canada. And then Kim Mitchell went on to a solo career and got even bigger. He has one that's 4 times platinum in Canada, Rockland. Um, my one of my top three favorite guitarists of all time is Kim Mitchell, and one of my top three favorite lyricists of all time is Pi Dubois, who
I,
writes the Max Webster lyrics, and he's not in the band. He's like one of those external lyricist guys.
which Blur the Cult had. Um, I like how you describe them. I mean, you call pie giddy, colorful, beef heart inspired poetry.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
nice.
yeah,
And for Kim Mitchell, you call Fripp like oddity of
yeah,
guitar playing.
yeah.
Great descriptions there.
And
Um,
their drummer Gary McCracken is a legend in Canada as well. And when Max Webster would go on tour with Rush, um, uh, Neil Peart would sit behind Gary McCracken on his own kit and play not mic'd up and try to trip up Gary and give him challenging little
really?
rhythms while Gary was playing the backup set with Max Webster mic'd up. Neil would be behind him, and I think he did this later on with other bands as well. But he would drum quietly behind Gary and try to screw him up behind him. But yeah, Neil had a lot of respect for Gary as well.
Well, you call his playing plush, sober drumming.
Yeah.
Sober drumming. How do you just maybe can.
Well, conservative, but very, very tasteful and classy.
Okay,
And
there you
with
go.
the amazing production values this band got, they were like Steely Dan level production values on these records.
Hmm.
Um, but beautiful, beautiful cymbal sounds and big deep snare sounds. So it was very classy, but it wasn't incredibly cluttered. I mean, when they got proggy, he could play busy when he had to. But there was just so much personality in this band from all departments. Terry Watkinson on keyboards as well, but Kim as a guitarist, Pi as a lyricist, a really, really classy, cool band. So yeah, they had a 76 album, a 77, a 78, this album in 79, and then a final album in is it 81 or 80? Anyways, Universal Juveniles, and that's it. That's all they did. So it's a nice tight catalog, all of it super high quality. People should check them out.
Yeah, you're making a good case that every record collector should have their albums in their collection.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. Well, thanks, Martin. And we look forward to your next top 20, which,
All right.
usually comes out, like 3 times a month, 2 times.
Yeah.
Um, and is always interesting. Always interesting.
Very
Our
cool.
readers
Thank you.
really love it. Our readers really do love it. In fact, I think I told you this. One of the most trafficked, one of the biggest, the best stories on Goldmine. Usually they're in the top 20 articles. That get the most hits, the most views. So
Nice.
very well done.
Cool. Well,
Thank
thank you
you.
very much. Looking forward to the
Keep up the
next one.
great work, and we'll talk soon. Okay.
Okay. Thanks again.
Thanks,
Bye
Martin.
now.